Jesus didn't change his message to try and attract people to his cause. He not only drove off seekers, he drove off disciples.
Right.
Because it is a high-cost item to deny yourself and follow Jesus. And we want to make it a low cost. We want to make it all the benefits you're going to get from being a Christian. Here's what you need to do, which means, oh no, you don't have to believe all those things that are controversial in the culture. You can believe whatever you want about that. You just need to come to Jesus. And if you come to Jesus, everything's going to be fine. That's not the message of Jesus. That's not the message of the Bible. That's not the message of the apostles. That's a false gospel.
Revolution of common sense.
Revolution of common sense.
A revolution of common sense.
Truth was once common sense, but today, truth is uncommon. Explore biblical truths around faith, business, and politics with Peter Demas. Uncommon Sense in Current Times.
Hey folks, welcome to Uncommon Sense in Current Times. Today I am with Frank Turek. Many of you know Frank as a Christian apologist, author, public speaker. He's founded crossexamined.org. He regularly engages skeptics on college campuses and in public debates, defending the reliability of Christianity, the New Testament, the existence of God, and just a rational case for Christianity. His podcast and his show is absolutely amazing with some of the guests and thoughts he has on there. But today I want to bring Frank on to talk about boldness, and I'm very excited to bring this up because he is somebody who has to face it every day and deal with it on a regular basis. And so I want to rely on his experience and also talk to him about things that happen in light of what happened with Charlie Kirk and the assassination of Charlie Kirk. So Frank, thank you so much for being on the program. I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Peter.
All right. So, I mean, I know you're close to Charlie, and I don't want to be insensitive. I don't want to ask things that are personal. But I do want to look at this theologically. And so when we see something like this to happen, I think it raises an uncomfortable question for the church of whether the church has spoken up enough in this situation. Have we been courageous enough? Did it make it appear that Charlie was kind of on the outside because the church has been quiet? What do you think about that?
Well, Jesus promised we'd be persecuted, as did Paul, for what we believe. That's nothing new. It's been happening for 2,000 years. There are about 50 Charlie Kirks every day being murdered in Nigeria right now. At least there were. And so persecution is nothing new. The shocking thing about Charlie's murder was that it was done in public and everybody saw the graphic details of it. And the fact that he was simply answering a question, he wasn't doing anything that in most cases would be considered hostile. The problem is that many of the issues that college kids bring up, the church hardly ever deals with. And so he was actually asking a question about transgender violence, ironically, of all things, when that trans-associated shooter, alleged shooter, shot him. So it's sad that in our culture, which has freedom of religion, that too many, it seems, churches don't want to deal with the hard issues. They just want to deal with issues that they deem to be safe. And when I think about what the church should be doing, which is making disciples, too infrequently do we do that. We don't make disciples. We try and coax people into being believers, but Jesus never said make believers. He said make disciples. And this whole seeker-friendly movement, which seems well-intended, but actually doesn't work and has never worked to make disciples. In fact, Bill Hybels, the guy that really started it in the modern era, who started Willow Creek Church back in the 70s, not far from where Charlie grew up in Illinois, said, we haven't made disciples in the seeker movement. And Jesus was not only not seeker-friendly, he was not even disciple-friendly. I mean, in John chapter 6, after he feeds the 5,000 and then goes over to Capernaum, which is a beautiful spot if you ever get the chance to go to Israel. Capernaum is pretty much intact. You can see where Jesus was when he said this. He was in a synagogue, and there's a 4th century synagogue built over the synagogue in which Jesus spoke. Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he talks about, if you want to follow me, you must eat my flesh and drink my blood. And many of his disciples said, this is a hard teaching. We can't follow this guy anymore. And then Peter, he turns to Peter and he says, does this offend you? And Peter, in a stroke of genius, normally he said things that were not that bright, he would react in the wrong way. But in this case, he said, where else are we going to go? You have the keys to eternal life. Now, notice when Jesus said to Peter, does this offend you? And if he had objected and said, well, yeah, it does offend us, just like these other guys said, this is a hard teaching. Jesus didn't say, oh, I'm sorry to offend you. If you don't like these principles, I have other principles I'll divert to. No, Jesus didn't change his message to try and attract people to his cause. He not only drove off seekers, he drove off disciples.
Right.
Because it is a high cost item to deny yourself and follow Jesus. And we want to make it a low cost. We want to make it all the benefits you're going to get from being a Christian. Here's what you need to do, which means, oh no, you don't have to believe all those things that are controversial in the culture. You can believe whatever you want about that. You just need to come to Jesus. And if you come to Jesus, everything's going to be fine. That's not the message of Jesus. That's not the message of the Bible. That's not the message of the apostles. That's a false gospel.
So do you think though that even with the seeker movement, even though it's softer than making disciples, do you still see a fear of boldness from people even in that area? I know when I talk to people, that seems to be now even controversial to even talk to people about Christianity at all, even when you're Christian.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's what I think. I think people are afraid to even bring up any issue that might offend or cause people to disagree with what the Bible says. They think they're more merciful than God, that I've got to present the gospel. I need to water it down. I need to shave off the rough edges that our culture may not agree with so people will accept it. Well, what kind of gospel are you getting them to accept then? Not the true gospel. You're getting them to accept something that's false, a watered down version, which I think it was Tozer who said something like this. I'll probably butcher this quote, but he said something like, most churches are preaching a message that if it were poison, it wouldn't hurt anybody. And if it were a cure, it wouldn't cure anyone. It's like in the middle.
Okay, but for you, I mean, we can watch you go up, the college campuses. You have a bunch of people that come and approach you, and they're when you first started doing this, did you have that fear? Do you still have that fear now beforehand? And I'm sure it's been exaggerated some, whatever fear you had in light of Charlie Kirk's death. But did you have that fear when you first started out?
The fear that people wouldn't agree? Well, of course. Nobody wants to be in a confrontation. I mean, that's not. You want people to agree with you. But I've come to realize that I shouldn't expect people to agree with me. People will say to me, well, Frank, why don't you get mad when students get testy? And I say, look, I'm 64 years old. When I was 24, I didn't agree with my 64-year-old self. So why should I expect a 24-year-old now to agree with my 64-year-old self? I shouldn't. And even talking to Christians, why should we expect people in our lives to agree with our spiritual perspective right now when maybe 10 years ago we didn't agree with our spiritual perspective right now? We're all on this journey, hopefully getting closer to the truth. But why do we expect everybody to be at our level of spiritual maturity as we are right now when we weren't even there at some point in the past? People are at different stages. They're at different places in life. And so you got to give them enough grace to say, okay, I don't know what this student has learned or what they've experienced or what they've read or what they haven't read or what they have been taught. I don't know any of that. So this person at the microphone may have what they believe to be really good reasons for what they think they believe. And for me to get mad at them wouldn't make any sense anyway.
But before you go on stage, before you go up, Yeah, how do you walk through that feeling? I know when I speak publicly, when I go up, it's always my first 30 seconds are probably the worst 30 seconds of my entire speech, because I have to kind of get in the rhythm of talking, and once I do, I'm good. But there's like that little bit of fear that'll take place right there, and that fear for me is a little energizing. Whether it's at a church where everyone agrees with, or whether it's a secular event where they don't, I have that same feeling. What do you do to help you overcome that fear? And maybe you don't anymore, but if you did, what did you do to help at that for other
Well,
people out
you
there?
always have your first couple of minutes nailed. I mean, you always walk up there knowing exactly what you're going to say, how you're going to start. Now, for me, it's never, "Oh, it's great to be here. Oh, nice to see you." That's perfunctory, and nobody really believes you anyway. I
Right.
always either start with a statement or a question, a story or a question. I hardly say hello. I just jump right in, because you want to engage people right away. You want to seize the audience. You want them to be engaged. You don't want to waste your time when everybody's looking at you on stuff that doesn't matter. You can say thank you 10 minutes into the presentation. That's what Churchill would always say to do, right? Um, you need to dive right in. So I'm normally asking a question, or I'm normally jumping into a compelling story right off the bat.
So what pushes you to keep doing this? Especially now. Like, why did you have a more increased level of urgency to continue to engage?
Well, yeah, God wants, he wants us to make disciples. That's in the scriptures. And to go into places that are hostile to the faith. We're really just trying to throw a lifeline to the Christians and put a stone in the shoe of the skeptic in these dark places. So that's what I've always wanted to do. And that's what Charlie was doing. Of course, I'd been doing it a lot longer because I'm 30 years older than Charlie, but there are other people out there doing this, like Cliff Connectley, and Cliff comes to mind because he's been doing it even longer than I have. There are other people that go onto college campuses, Rice Brooks of God's Not Dead, and others, and Josh McDowell used to do it a lot. I just always wanted to go to where Christianity was most reviled or most talked down to, because I wanted to show people there that Christianity is the most reasonable worldview. Now, since Charlie, though, we have to bring a security team with us. And so what used to cost us $5,000 per campus and donor funds now costs us $15,000 per campus, because it's not just for my safety, but for the safety of the audience. And so, people go through metal detectors now. That never happened before Charlie. People, we have a security team. We have help from the local authorities. We were just down at Northern Florida, and some of these, University of Northern Florida, just last week, we were at NC State, Elon, and Northern Florida. They actually brought a sniper team out. I'm like, this is kind of overkill, isn't it? But, they don't want that same kind of thing happening on their campus.
Right.
So you understand. The people at Utah Valley University dropped the ball big time. The university police said, "Oh, we got the roofs." No, they didn't. I hope somebody's brought up on charges over that, because that was negligence.
Now, when I was at CIA, I attended CIA with you in earlier. Well, I would say earlier this year, but I guess later of last year. You and Charlie were planning on going to UC Berkeley shortly after, and you were asking for prayers for that. Was there specific fears that was pushing that one over others, because it's Berkeley, because they're going to be a lot more hostile? And then again, how did you make that decision to say, okay, this is worth to go here, even though I'm going into really hostile territory?
Well, I told Charlie, because Charlie said, "Hey, we got to do one of these together." I said, "I want to go to Berkeley. I want to go to the worst place." So he said, "Okay, let's do Berkeley then." So instead of Charlie, obviously, he remained in glory, Rob Schneider and I went. The comedian, who's a brilliant guy, by the way. He's trying to follow Jesus now, and he's very witty. I don't think people realize how smart you have to be a comedian.
Yes, you do.
Yeah, because you have to be able to know the world and see where it's incongruent with wisdom or reality or where it's contradictory, and that's how you make things funny, right? So Rob knows how to do that. Now, it was interesting when we went to Berkeley, in the room with Rob was a couple of guys. One of them was Peter Boghossian. I don't know
Yes,
if you know who Peter Boghossian is.
I
He
do.
was an atheist who wrote the book, A Manual for Creating Atheists. Well, he and I just hit it off right away. I had been following his work, and although he and I don't agree on God, we agree on a lot, particularly the necessity to save Western civilization, particularly from the encroachment of radical Islam. And so Peter and I just hit it off. I've had him on the show a couple times, and he's over in Paris right now, actually interviewing Muslims and others, and trying to wake up Europe that you just can't have unmitigated immigration for people who do not assimilate. You're going to lose your freedom of religion, your freedom of speech, your freedom of assembly, your freedom of press, your freedom of worship, all those. You're going to lose all that, because that's just what 1,400 years of history shows. Islam wants to impose Islam on the entire world. There aren't freedoms that you have with regard to religion and speech and these other things in Muslim countries. That's not Islamophobia. First of all, Islamophobia is a bogus term. There are Muslims that come from every ethnic or racial group. So it has nothing to do with racism or any of that. Islam is an ideology, and it's wise to be against an ideology that wants to take your freedoms away and wants to impose Sharia law on the nation. In fact, Islam is a violation. Sharia law is a violation of the United States Constitution. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution gives you freedom of religion, but it doesn't give you freedom of religion to take everyone else's freedom of religion away. It's not a self-defeating, self-contradictory amendment. And so Peter and Charlie was, by the way, as well, concerned about Islam taking over free areas, Europe and the United States.
Do you see Christian persecution coming more from Islam or from non-Christians? And I ask from Islam because even in Dearborn, Michigan, I don't know if you're aware of, a few years back there was even an attempted stoning of Christians that were speaking out, and the police actually blamed the Christians for aggravating the situation. It's on YouTube if you hadn't seen it, or anybody out there haven't seen it. So where do you see persecution coming from next here in the U.S.?
Well, Dearborn is a key example of why. Now, I've been told this, and I've looked it up. It seems legit. Do you know why Dearborn is such a magnet for Muslims? Was because Henry Ford was an anti-Semite. And so he would bring Muslims over to work in his factories in Detroit. And look that up. I think that's true.
Huh.
And that's why Dearborn has become an area that has a high concentration of Muslims in it. And yes, that's the kind of future we have. And you don't just need to look at Dearborn. You can look at places in the UK. Parts of London have Sharia law.
Right.
Cops don't even go in there. Right. I was in Paris 16 years ago. I took a wrong turn and I thought I was in Saudi Arabia. Right. So, it's not theoretical. It's actual. And we love Muslims. We want Muslims to come to know Jesus.
Right.
But the political part of Islam, which is a part of their religion, wants to impose Islam on the entire world.
So when we see situations like whether it's the assassination of Charlie, or whether it is the stoning that again they happened in Dearborn or other those situations, do you see this as a type of persecution? And I ask that question because if I speak about persecution, it is actually the second most pushback I get is we're not really persecuted. We don't know what persecution really is. And I guess compared to Nigeria, we don't experience that here. Do you see that as persecution, the beginning stages of it? How would you define that?
Well, sure. You could define persecution as, mild disapproval to martyrdom, right? Obviously.
Right.
And, Charlie got the worst. And Charlie wouldn't have been there if he wasn't a Christian. Right? He wouldn't have been up there talking about what he was talking about. And he was murdered, if the evidence that we have now is correct. He was murdered because of his Christian views on gender. Right?
Right.
That's what this guy was all about, to stop his hateful talk, as if disagreeing with someone is hate. The guy that shot him is the hater, obviously, not a guy talking about whether transgenderism is a valid way to view life or not. The guy who shot him for talking about that is the hater. I mean, it's just so ridiculous how backwards everybody thinks on some of these things. You call somebody a fascist, and here's what Charlie was doing. He was inviting people who disagreed with him to come to the front of the line, and he would hand them the microphone and say, go ahead, make your case, let's have a discussion. Because we all know that's a typical fascist tactic, Peter, right? To give your opponent the microphone and let him or her speak. No, it's the guy that shot him is the fascist. It's crazy how people get this all backwards, but that's Satan for you. He'll twist things.
But in a constitutional society that we have with guarantees of free speech, there's not the guarantee that we have to be truthful in the free speech. And I think truth seems to be pulling further and further away as people want to utilize speech. Do you agree with that?
Yes, you have the freedom to be wrong and express it. And so freedom of speech includes the freedom of others to utter things you don't like, even offensive things. Now, I would argue that freedom of speech does not extend to libel. You can lie to and hurt somebody with lies, and they can sue you for that. That's true. Nor, and this is going to be controversial, but I think it's true. I read a whole book on it. Nor does the freedom of speech extend to pornography.
I agree.
In fact, there was a Harvard professor, I have his book up there, No Liberty for License. I think his name is Mansfield. I read that book 20 years ago. I think he's spot on. The intention of the First Amendment was not to protect obscenity, which is what pornography is. Well, how do you judge what pornography is? One Supreme Court justice famously said, I know it when I see it. We all know what it is, okay? Even if we can't explicitly define it. But it's pornography is not protected by the First Amendment.
I always find it funny. They know it in order to put the age gaps on there.
Sure.
You can't watch it over here, but we don't know what it is outside of that.
Mm-hmm.
But okay. So now I'm going to have to kind of switch, because obviously the free speech and the free religion comes in conflict when it comes to like what happened at that church in Minnesota with Don Lemon and that whole group, or again, what happened in Dearborn in those situations. Because what happened in Dearborn, they blamed the Christians for being disruptive. I didn't take that when I watched it. However, the argument was still the same on why it's not free speech. How do you
It's not free speech.
deal with
Stoning somebody's not free speech. That's harming somebody with physical objects.
No, I was talking about before. They were blaming the Christians for the reason why. They were saying that the Christians were engaging, which was creating it made it the area hostile, which then turned it on them. So they were the blame.
The Christians were inciting the violence.
Yes,
Was that their view? Well, I haven't seen it, so I can't make that judgment. But it's true. You don't have the right to incite violence against other people. But whether that's the case or not, I don't know. But even inciting violence does not what's the word I'm looking for? Does not acquit the person that picks up a rock and throws it at the person inciting violence. That's still a crime as well.
All right. So now let's take it from here. So we saw this huge increase with TPUSA. A lot of people were more involved. How do we maintain this momentum so it's not just like another 9/11 where we saw like some moral reflection, some boldness that comes out, and then it just kind of faded with time? What can the church do? And then and I say the church, I'm not talking about the building, the institution. I'm talking about the people, me, you, the person at the convenience store. What can we do to maintain this going forward?
It's like Charlie said, the thing he loved about the virtue of courage is it doesn't take any skill. You don't have to have any skill to be courageous. You just need to make a decision to do something. It may have been Churchill who said this, but courage is the first of all virtues because without it, you won't do anything else. So what the church needs to do, Christians need to do, is be more bold, to speak up, because courage actually encourages other people to speak up. When somebody sees one person doing something that maybe is a little bit outside the box, outside what we call the Overton window, other people will go, oh, I guess I can do that as well now.
Right.
So it encourages others. So we just need to speak up. That's why so many people have said, I am Charlie Kirk now. I am going to do this. So we need to encourage people to be bold about their faith and know why they believe what they believe. Because you just can't go out there in today's culture, at least not with most people, and just throw Bible verses at them.
Right.
Most unbelievers now are going to say, why do you believe that book? That's a bigoted book, they'll say. It's a fairy tale. You've got to have answers. You got to have evidence, and that's what we try and do at Cross-Examined. We try and provide evidence, and that's our podcast. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. We provide evidence that it's true. That's our book as well, as you know.
I was in talking with people. I became Christian late in life, and one of the things that kind of surprised me with Christians when I started getting around them was it wasn't the fact they all felt like they needed to be bold. My pastor will talk about boldness and everyone will applaud. And my son asked me one time, we were leaving, he says, why does he have to say it every time and everyone applauds when if they're doing it, why would he have to say it every time? And I was like, yeah, that's true. But then I said, he was in college at the time. I said, how many times do you pray for your food in front of your friends? And just that silence, that guilt silence that came with them. But I noticed for me, what I've seen is that the boldness seems to come more from they're an obstacle that's preventing them. Do you think they need to deal with it more than they have to deal with the reason? There's like internal versus external reasons on why they're not bold.
Yeah, and I think part of it's personality dependent too. Like some people they can have people disagree with them and it doesn't bother them. It doesn't bother me much. People disagree, okay, fine. Other people are much more sensitive. God has given different constitutions to different people, and those people tend to have different gifts, right? So I think part of it is personality driven, but I also think that we're commanded to be bold. We're commanded to have courage. We're commanded to have a reason for the hope that we have, to have answers for why we believe what we believe. So it's not really an option. It may be harder for some people than others, but we still need to do it. And we know the ultimate destiny of all of us, regardless of, how bold we are, that if we're in Christ, we're ultimately going to be with him in eternity. But those of us that are bolder and go out there and make more of a difference are going to have more rewards than other people that aren't. But we're still nevertheless commanded, regardless of our personality or disposition, to, in our own way, be bold and to make a defense of the gospel.
So advice that you can give, or hope or encouragement you can give the restaurant server, the grocery store cashier, that wants to be more bold, wants to talk about it, maybe not again engage in a public debate. They may not have the ability to engage in a public debate, but they can still engage with people. What would you offer them as advice for that situation?
Well, first of all, two things. Get in a small group that can encourage you, especially if you are at risk of losing your job because of your faith. This was the advice by a Roman Catholic priest in Czechoslovakia during World War II. He knew the Nazis were going to lose, but he also knew the Russians were going to come in afterwards and impose an iron curtain on them. And he said, we got to get into small groups now, because if we don't, we're not going to be able to support one another when difficulty arises. So these people in the small group would support one another. If someone lost a job because they were Christian, they'd chip in to help the person or help the person find a new job, that kind of thing.
Right.
So you need that support structure, number one. Number two, I know this is going to sound a little bit out of the box and maybe not the expected answer. If you're on the job, your job is not to evangelize people. Your job is to do your job according to your employer. Now, if you find instances where the situation opens up, maybe you see the couple praying at the table for their meal, then, okay, you can make a comment, hey, nice to see, are you Christians? I'm a Christian, that kind of thing. But I don't think that you have a responsibility. I think you have more responsibility to be a good employee because you're on that person's time to follow the rules that they've put in place, as long as they don't contradict with God's rules, obviously. To give that person your all, give your employer your all at work, and I don't think you ought to turn it into an evangelism sort of environment. If the opportunity opens up, fine, but don't try and force that. I know you own restaurants. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with it to some level. I definitely agree that that's not the main job to do it. I would
Yeah.
also, where I would disagree with you on it, and maybe not disagreement because you didn't kind of cover this part, but when I see people like Paige Casey, who is the CVS pharmacist, who said, "I will do everything but give out the abortion pill."
Oh no, I agree
Or
with that.
yeah.
I thought you were asking about, what
No,
ways can
I
you?
was,
Yeah,
but yeah, I want to make
yeah,
certain
yeah,
that distinction is made.
yeah. No, yeah, that's what I said. If it disagrees with the Bible, no, you can't do it.
Right.
But the idea that you're going to be an evangelist to customers who come into your employer's store, I don't think that's your role. I don't think you're treating your employer fairly when you do that, unless the customer invites it. Okay, fine.
Right.
Right. I mean, you wouldn't, if you employed a Muslim in your restaurant, you wouldn't want him telling his employees to, or your customers to, you ought to be reading the Quran, right? You'd be going,
Right.
"Whoa, hold on, bro." There's a time and place for everything. Now, when you're on break with your fellow employees, sure, then it's time to open up those conversations, right?
Yes.
But when you're in the service of an employer and you're trying to serve customers, that's your main role, to serve them.
So, I also look at it in the sense of, if you're right, if the opportunity presents itself. So, for example, I want people to do a good job. I want them to do it for the right reason, but they have to be able to say, when people say, "Why do you do it this way?" They need to say it's because I'm a Christian,
Sure.
not because, hey, I'm just a good hard worker. And I
That's
think we
right.
have to make that distinction
Mhm.
when we do it. But there's still a fear factor involved in it of, hey, in the restaurant business, so many people are in it because they made bad decisions in their life. So yeah, I'm not going to go party with you. I'm not going to this bar afterward. I'm not doing that because I'm a Christian. I think there you can bring that stuff up and risk that exclusion, people making fun of you, all of that. And
Oh
I think
yeah.
that's where some of that comes into play.
Well, that's 1 Peter 3:15. It's in the context of suffering, Oh, when asked, it's basically always be ready to give a reason for the hope that you have. Yeah, so give a reason when they, say, hey, why are you different? Why are you doing things this way? Why don't you come out and, do tequila shots with the rest of us? Well, here's why. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, one last question, and then I definitely want to wrap up. But again, ridicule is a big piece, and ridicule. I mean, they've been using ridicule going all the way back to in Book of Acts. I mean,
Mhm.
we see even going back further. But ridicule seems to be the biggest obstacle that people have. I don't want to be made fun of. I don't want to not be
Mhm.
invited to the Christmas party. I don't want
Right.
to. So there's that peer pressure involved. Again, what advice do you give people on that? Because I know no one's ever made fun of you for anything. I mean, I'm sure that's never.
Yeah, well, Jesus gives us the advice in Matthew chapter 5 in the Sermon on the Mount when he says, when people insult you on account of me, rejoice because great is your reward in heaven. Look, if somebody doesn't hate you, you're doing something wrong. Okay. If nobody knows you're a Christian, maybe that's why you're not getting ridiculed.
Right.
Maybe that's why you're not getting opposition, because nobody knows you're a Christian. So get in a small group so you can get support at home, and realize that things are going to be difficult out there, that it's not going to be that everyone's going to love everything you say or believe or do. And so, what standard are they ridiculing you by? Why do they think they're right? Right? They
Right.
don't really have one. It's just their own personal standard. So, I would ask a lot of questions when people, if they call you a name, you're a bigot. What do you mean by bigotry? And see because as soon as they start to define it, they're going to be in trouble. Well, bigotry, you don't agree with me. Well, you don't agree with me. Does that make you a bigot? Well, you're taking away certain rights from people. Well, where do rights come from? And why do you think those are rights? Right? Rights only come from God. Has God said you have a right to mutilate your teenager's body? What What do you get? Has God said you have a right to end the life of an unborn child in the womb? Where are you getting this from? Right? So I would just ask a bunch of questions. Now, they may not acquiesce to that, but at least you're planting a seed, right? You're going,
Right.
"Hmm."
So people want to find more about you. Your podcast, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. You have crossexamine.org. Like, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you, find out what you're doing, everything there? Because you got some amazing stuff out there.
Yeah, the website, crossexamine.org, will take you everywhere else. Probably our most popular two sites now, other than the website, are the YouTube channel. 2 words, Cross Examine, where you can see the podcast, by the way, the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist podcast. We do 2 of those a week. One drops on Tuesday, the other's on Friday. And then the Instagram page, I think that's under my name, Dr. Frank Turek. I don't post there, but our team does, so everything's up there. And those are probably the 2 places. I have a Twitter account, Dr. Frank Turek, as well. Oh, it's X now. Sorry, X. So, and a few other places. All that you can see on our website, crossexamined.org. Cross-examine with a D on the end of it.org.
And we'll have that in the notes as well. So, well, Frank, thank you so much again for being on the program. I greatly appreciate it. I love talking with you. I like the insight that you have. And so, again, just thank you so much for everything that you're doing out there.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much.